Good morning, everybody. If we could take our places again, please, we will start this next session. My name is Nigel Waters. I'm here representing both the Australian Privacy Foundation and also Privacy International. I too would like to thank, firstly, our Uruguayan hosts for supporting this event, which is very important to civil society. It's great to see the support we have from our Data Protection Authority colleagues for the increasing involvement of civil society in these important discussions. And also my thanks to Lily Coney for all the hard work she's done in putting this event together. We have an interesting panel here today, and we have limited time, so we will move straight into discussion. I just wanted to, could I get my slides up, please? They are the file marked Waters, PowerPoint Waters. I think the technician Nicolas is here at the back there. Waters. Okay. Yeah. We have Waters, Brian will be next, and then Chang. They are the only three. Okay. Come on. Is he putting this one up? Okay. This is an abbreviated title for the session, and I really want to emphasize the fact that in this session we'd really like to focus specifically on the enforcement of privacy norms in the different jurisdictions. Next slide. That's the full title as it appears on the program, and really it was an attempt to get the panelists to focus on the importance not only of the agreed international norms, and we've had some discussion about those already, but also going beyond that into the practical enforcement, and picking up on the point that Miriam made in chairing the last session. It's not just what the laws say, it's how they perform in practice on the ground, delivering privacy protection for consumers that is important. I've asked the panelists to comment in the context of the various international instruments, and again, that's just a reminder of the various initiatives that we need to be conscious of. You've heard already about most of those, but also, of course, the panelists will give you examples drawn from their own domestic jurisdictions. Just by way of introduction, really my point in planning this session was to say that effective privacy protection requires not only rules, preferably principles that are binding in law, but also mechanisms and provisions for remedies and redress, which include complaint mechanisms, effective and adequate powers for regulators, sanctions and penalties for those occasions when things go wrong, and that whilst all of those things can be provided and are provided in most data protection laws, they are necessary but not in themselves sufficient. Because effective privacy protection also requires adequate resources, and thanks for the question that went to that issue in the last panel. The willingness of the regulator, the Data Protection Authority, to use the powers that they've been given. And that's a very important issue, which also goes to that question of independence, which was also raised previously. And it also requires, where possible, active consumers, civil society, NGOs, and/or an active media to help to feed the regulator. Regulators can't do all the heavy lifting themselves. They need support. They need the flow of complaints from individuals, from NGOs. They need media attention to help them do their work. So what I'd really like to ask all of the panelists to do is to, in their own way, talk about how well the current arrangements, either internationally or in their domestic jurisdictions, measure up in relation to those objectives, and how well, perhaps, if they wish to comment on this, do the current reviews and reforms in those international fora take into account the importance of practical delivery as opposed to the paper promise. The practical enforcement aspects, as well as getting the norms and the rules right in the first place. And as an optional extra, how well do those current frameworks and the current reviews address the question of cross-border enforcement, which is becoming more important with the globalization of business and government and the global flows of data. I would just like, before handing over to the panel, I can't resist coming back at Lara Ballard's point. I really find it strange that the questions of independence and of attention to sensitive data are characterized somehow as a uniquely European concern. I would suggest that if there is any cultural specificity, it's the cultural specificity of the US approach to data protection. I think the rest of the world acknowledges some of these issues as very important, and it's really the US which is the outlier in this respect in relation to some of those debating points. So I'll hand over now to the first of our panelists. I will actually introduce them all now so that I don't have to interrupt the flow. We're going to ask Anna Brian from here in Uruguay to speak first, because she has to leave us to speak at the Ibero-American conference as well. I'm then going to go to Alan Chang, the Hong Kong Privacy Commissioner, then to Jose Bermudez, who's from Colombia, and I think is from the university, but also now from the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, responsible for data protection. Then to Francisco Vera from Chile, who represents a non-government organization, Derechos Digitales, concerned with internet rights. And then finally, Renata Avila from Guatemala, who is also going to be speaking from an NGO perspective. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Anna.
Okay, thank you.
And we have another PowerPoint, please. Can we bring up Ms. Bryan's PowerPoint?
Hola, buenos días a todos. Es un gusto recibirlos en mi país. Espero que disfruten de su estadía y puedan disfrutar como disfrutamos nosotros de esta linda ciudad, que el clima mejore y puedan todos pasar unos lindos momentos de relax con independencia del enriquecimiento que pueda proveerles estas jornadas. Voy a hablar hoy aquí sobre Iberoamérica y la evolución iberoamericana en la protección de datos personales, poniendo énfasis en cuál fue la importancia que tuvieron los tratados internacionales como manera de ingresar estos temas a los marcos normativos de nuestros países iberoamericanos. Tomé como punto de referencia el año 2000 como para hacer una ligera relación hacia atrás y hacia adelante de cómo es el proceso evolutivo de la protección de datos en Iberoamérica. Es entonces que, bueno, si tomamos el 2000 y pensamos el año 2000 y pensamos en el Uruguay, podemos decir que no existía en ese momento una disposición normativa que explícitamente tutelara la protección de datos personales. No obstante lo cual, sí existían y existen también hoy disposiciones de la Constitución de la República que refieren a la incorporación de los principios generales del derecho a nuestro ordenamiento normativo y como tales ingresan todos los que son los convenios internacionales y tratados. O sea, la concepción y un naturalista de nuestro legislador dentro de esta filosofía permitía introducir todas las normas de los tratados internacionales como principios generales del derecho. Entonces nos encontrábamos con que había una protección al dato, al derecho fundamental, la protección del dato. No obstante lo cual, todo el tema del enforcement se veía complicado y muy restringido. Aquí pongo algunas normas, nada más que a título ejemplificativo. La importancia que tuvieron fue durante ese momento y luego la siguen teniendo, pero de una forma diferente, como vamos a ver en adelante. Si vamos a Iberoamérica, o sea, año 2000, Iberoamérica, ¿qué encontramos? Que dentro de los ordenamientos jurídicos iberoamericanos hay muchas pautas que se repiten. Se repite, por ejemplo, el hecho de que exista normativa a nivel constitucional que consagra los derechos fundamentales protegidos dentro de un sistema de números apertus. ¿Qué significa esto? Que aunque no estén consagrados de manera explícita, sí están consagrados y son considerados como parte integrante de los principios generales del derecho que avalan la filosofía de nuestra Constitución. También existían disposiciones sectoriales comprensivas de la protección de datos para algunas zonas de actividad. Y, por otra parte, la normativa general, o sea, el tipo de leyes ómnibus para la protección de datos era totalmente excepcional. Recién en el año 2000 fue que Argentina publicó su ley de protección de datos. Otro fenómeno que es común en Iberoamérica es la existencia del habeas data como una forma de enforcement, pero igualmente no es lo más fácil, al no existir una ley específica, que esto pudiera aplicarse en los países iberoamericanos. En lo que hace a la protección de datos, en otros temas sí, por supuesto. Entonces, quise traer aquí una posibilidad de mostrar lo que fueron hitos en Iberoamérica. Y esta declaración de jefes de gobierno y jefes de Estado y de Gobierno del 2003 de Santa Cruz de la Sierra, que fue realizada en la 13 Cumbre Iberoamericana, dice específicamente: somos conscientes de que la protección de datos personales es un derecho fundamental de las personas y destacamos la importancia de iniciativas regulatorias iberoamericanas para proteger la privacidad de los ciudadanos, contenida en la declaración. O sea, aquí empieza a darse un vuelco hacia prestar más atención específica a la protección de datos personales. A continuación, a nivel de la Red Iberoamericana de Protección de Datos, en la antigua Guatemala, los representantes de los gobiernos iberoamericanos, digamos que había unas 3/4 partes de los países iberoamericanos representados, y ellos hicieron otra declaración en la cual valoraban el interés creciente, la preocupación y el compromiso que se ha puesto de manifiesto en Iberoamérica con la protección de datos personales, y reiteran la consideración de la protección de datos personales como un auténtico derecho fundamental de las personas, sobre todo en orden al respeto a su intimidad y su facultad de control y disposición sobre los mismos. Este texto, que es un poco largo, lo tienen a disposición en papel, si quieren llevarlo, seguramente va a estar en la red. Estas declaraciones van marcando hitos dentro de lo que son el sistema iberoamericano, que van empujando hacia la consagración explícita del derecho a la protección de datos personales. Luego tenemos la Declaración de Cartagena de Indias. Constituida ya la Red Iberoamericana de Protección de Datos, se marca su misión, que es informativa y que tiene por finalidad procurar que las distintas realidades normativas sean integradas y estructuradas y formular a una red iberoamericana como un organismo proactivo para plasmar iniciativas concretas. Es así como la Red Iberoamericana de Protección de Datos asume 3 roles. Primero, el de intercambio de información, sobre todo lo que son cuestiones normativas referentes a la protección de datos personales. En segundo lugar, el asesoramiento y la consulta permanente a todos y cada uno de los países que la integran. Y en tercer lugar, procurar medios de cooperación en la elaboración de documentos y propuestas conjuntas. Así se han redactado y se llegaron a documentos programáticos acerca de gobierno electrónico, necesidad de órganos de control, y un documento que es muy interesante, que se puede consultar en la página de la Red Iberoamericana de Protección de Datos, es el de las directrices, o sea, es como un texto de directrices sobre protección de datos, siguiendo los lineamientos europeos que marcan lo que son pautas que vienen consolidándose en la región. Entonces, ¿qué pasa? Hay un momento en el cual los países perciben que o no existe regulación en protección de datos o la regulación que existe no es adecuada, y perciben asimismo que para los individuos hay situaciones en las cuales funcionando dentro del marco de la legalidad igual se provocan perjuicios. ¿Por qué? Porque la regulación no es adecuada para defender el derecho humano fundamental a la protección de datos personales. Y es así como empieza a percibirse y tomar forma una situación en Iberoamérica. Por un lado aparece el sistema norteamericano, que se presenta para nosotros como un sistema sectorializado de protección de datos, fraccionado, que tiene disposiciones legales y jurisprudencia, pero no está sistematizada. Y por otro lado se presenta el sistema europeo, que está estructurado en torno a la Directiva 95/46 con normas estrictas en el cual se aplica el régimen como resultado de la transposición de la directiva al orden interno de los Estados y al cual se agrega la vocación universalista del Convenio 108. Quiero decirles que lo que quiero mostrarles es la tendencia y la evolución, cómo se fue sucediendo en nuestros países iberoamericanos, cómo fueron dándose las cosas y cómo las hemos percibido desde aquí. O sea, no pretendo hacer un análisis crítico de la situación, sino mostrarle cómo fue la evolución. En lo que son los objetivos de la Directiva 95/46, bueno, todos lo sabemos, pero es la protección de las libertades y los derechos fundamentales de las personas físicas, evitar las restricciones a la libre circulación de los datos personales, procurar defender los intereses de las empresas, dar importancia a las transferencias internacionales de datos, pero solo se pueden realizar dentro de determinadas condiciones, y luego la cooperación. Se insistía mucho en la cooperación. Puntos fundamentales: el carácter autónomo del derecho a la protección de datos, la existencia de principios, de obligaciones y de derechos, y la existencia de una autoridad de control. Es así como poco a poco la Unión Europea va asumiendo un rol de liderazgo en la zona y va teniendo un papel proactivo en el desarrollo de los datos personales. ¿Cuáles son en este momento las convergencias en Iberoamérica? O sea, ¿desde dónde vamos y hacia dónde vamos? Bueno, se reconoce el derecho, después existen normas de habeas data y existen también normas sectoriales que regulan la protección de datos personales, a la vez que se percibe una evolución hacia el sistema europeo. Las normas, ¿cuáles son? Me apuro porque me están pidiendo el tiempo. Muchas, pero entre ellas la Directiva 95/46 y el Convenio 108, que son los que muestran el régimen europeo mismo. Entonces, ¿qué sucede en Iberoamérica? Van apareciendo leyes. La primera fue la Argentina, en el 2000. Fíjense que tardó 8 años en llegar la uruguaya, que fue la segunda, y a continuación en el 2010 México, 2011 Perú, 2011 también Costa Rica y Nicaragua y Colombia en el 2012, marcando lo que son la existencia de leyes ómnibus, leyes generales en materia de protección de datos personales, que va mostrando una tendencia dentro del continente iberoamericano a seguir el modelo europeo de protección de datos, procurando siempre la adecuación. ¿Cuáles son los requisitos para la adecuación? Bueno, la existencia de legislación adecuada y la existencia de una autoridad de control independiente. ¿Y cuáles son las consecuencias? El aumento del intercambio comercial, del comercio electrónico y el desarrollo de los servicios de la información. Entonces, si volvemos al esquema anterior que dice los países que tienen ley en Iberoamérica, podemos ver que vamos siguiendo un orden. Argentina y Uruguay han obtenido la declaración de adecuación de la Unión Europea y otros países también la van a procurar. Gracias.
Okay.
No sé si me pasé del tiempo. Gracias por escucharme. Espero haber sido útil y estoy a las órdenes. Me excuso porque tengo que retirarme, pero estoy a las órdenes si hay algo que quisieran discutir en los intercambios próximos. ¿Sí? Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Anna. If we could get Mr. Chang's presentation up, please. Anna, could you bring the control?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much.
See you later.
Okay, see you later.
See you later.
Yeah. Just left and right. Okay, we now have Mr. Alan Chang, the Privacy Commissioner for Personal Data from Hong Kong. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. And ladies and gentlemen, good morning. First of all, I'd like to start by saying that I will not talk about APEC's arrangements on the cross-border privacy rule system as has been introduced by Nigel. The reason is I'm no expert in the system. The system is in place. But just to mention this, it has been installed, but at a very early stage. So I won't be able to quote any practical experience of actually invoking that mechanism. So I think I'd better do another job of talking about what actually happens at the lower level, the Privacy Commissioner's level. The APEC system, it's really a government initiative. It's from the ministers and it's been installed, but time will tell how it works. So maybe in a couple of years' time, I'll be talking more about that. But at this point in time, I'd like to talk about APA, which is an association of the Privacy Commissioners in Asia Pacific. This is the principal forum for privacy authorities in the region to form partnership and exchange ideas about privacy regulation, new technologies, and the management of privacy inquiries and complaints. We, among ourselves, convene meetings at 6 monthly intervals. And what we do, we facilitate sharing of knowledge and resources between ourselves. We foster cooperation in privacy and data protection. We jointly promote privacy awareness. We promote best practices among ourselves. We work to continuously improve our regulatory performance, and we support efforts to improve cross-border cooperation in privacy enforcement. Who are we then? We include commissioners from around the region, countries with jurisdictions from around the region, and that includes the Australian Commonwealth Information Commissioner, regulators from New Zealand, from New South Wales, Australia, Victoria, Australia, Northern Territory, Australia, Korean Internet and Security Agency, Information and Privacy Commissioner of British Columbia, Canada, Privacy Commission of Canada, Federal Trade Commission, United States of America, and the regulator from Mexico, IFI, and also from Macau. First of all, we think that promotion of awareness in privacy issues is important among all the jurisdictions concerned. So what we do, we hold annual what we call Privacy Awareness Week jointly together to promote the concept of privacy awareness among the different communities. What we did this year, earlier this year, 2012, we do what we call online and offline privacy are equally important topic, and that is a campaign which is focused on young people, encouraging them to protect their personal data while engaging in the online activities such as social networking. The campaign we had this year capitalized on what we did last year, and that was a survey among the users of social networking from different communities of the region, assessing the differences in the behavior and habits of sharing personal data in social networking among different age groups and professions. As a result, we run, depending on the regions, we run activities like seminars, workshops, competitions of cartoons promoting the theme, drama series by professionals and among the students. Next year, already we're talking about what to do next year. We will be promoting jointly the protection of personal data in the use of smartphones and other mobile devices. We will be sharing among us information on guidelines that we have provided or will be providing to the industry on things to note for in the development of apps. That's for the industry players, and for the users of mobile devices, we'll be drawing up, or some of us have already been drawn up, but we'll be sharing information definitely on the topic of wise use of smart devices, mobile devices. Right, code of practice. Jurisdictions have different backgrounds, and they come up with different code of practices on different areas. We benefited from, again, sharing of knowledge and experience in these sort of code practices. We've drawn up separately. One that I have recently benefited from is a code of practice on consumer credit data. Last year, we revised our own code of practice because there is a pressing need for us to allow more sharing of mortgage data to curb speculation of property in Hong Kong. Property prices has been escalating, and in order to curb this sort of unhealthy trend, the government, a lot of property investors are talking about, what to share or what not to share in order to curb property prices. And one idea is to share more mortgage data. So you have more mortgage data are shared among the banks. The banks could be more prudent in lending money, and that could be conducive to stabilizing the market so that speculators would be somehow withdrawn from the market, less investments, less speculation. And the way I did the revision is to rely on the codes that other jurisdictions have adopted in this area. So different areas, different jurisdictions have different backgrounds, as I said, and it is important that I defend the revision in the Hong Kong code practice so that I can quote what's happening in other jurisdictions which are equally concerned about the limited sharing of consumers' credit data. Naming and shaming, it's again something we have shared among ourselves in one of the conferences we have last year. We adopted different degrees of naming the companies who have found contravening the privacy principles or privacy laws. And personally, I've benefited a lot from that sharing, because as a result of that seminar or conference we have among ourselves, I have in Hong Kong adopted a policy myself of every time we issue an investigation report on a major intrusion event, I will name the data controller or the data user at fault. That is a very effective deterrent on malpractices. That's something I found out from experience, because as you all know that privacy regulators are under-resourced, so we have to be very selective in order to be effective. So you have to pick those good cases which would have a major deterrent effect once the news is broken in the media. So that again is an outcome of what we could benefit individually from sharing best practices. 2 minutes. So Sony, again, another major privacy intrusion event that happened last year. We, amongst ourselves, share also experiences in different enforcement actions taken. Some of us took investigations. Some of us, because of various reasons, did not initiate any investigations. So we keep each other informed so that we know what's the right thing to do for individual jurisdictions. In Hong Kong, for example, I find out that Hong Kong was the last, or probably one of the 2 last jurisdictions that have not allowed Sony to resume its service after that major hacking incident. So that is an assessment of how harsh or how soft one jurisdiction could be in a concerted effort to tackle a major global intrusion. Google, the recent privacy policy change, again, is something we have acted concertedly in the Asia-Pacific region. We have formed a working group, and we wrote actually to Google. We talked to them over various teleconferences, and we think we have succeeded in seeking some improvements. That battle is still on. We are also liaising with other parts of the world, like CNIL. We know that CNIL has finalized its recommendations, and we have given our region's support to those recommendations. So again, that's an example of how we, the privacy commissioners in the region, cooperate. And we also, among ourselves, took the opportunity to liaise with the privacy commissioners in other parts of the world to achieve synergy in achieving greater synergy in enforcement work. Because of time constraints, I've stopped here, and we'll give more time when questions are asked. Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you. And next, we go to Jose Bermudez from Colombia.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Thank you to the public voice. Voy a continuar en español. De verdad que es un honor estar aquí en Uruguay y además yo vengo de la Superintendencia de Industria y Comercio en Colombia y es un honor además anunciar que desde la semana pasada en Colombia ya tenemos una ley general de protección de datos personales sancionada por el presidente y que ya se encuentra en plena vigencia. Tiene unos regímenes de transición, pero ya contamos en Colombia con un régimen general de protección de datos personales y es un honor poder anunciar ese resultado que hemos logrado en esta conferencia y en este evento en particular. Mi intervención, quiero simplemente referirme a lo que ha sido la experiencia colombiana desde el punto de vista de la puesta en práctica de normas de protección de datos personales que han venido a complementar un sistema que de forma muy similar como sucede con otros países en América Latina y como veíamos en la conferencia pasada de Ana, tienen su origen en la consagración de un derecho fundamental ya desde la Constitución política. En el caso colombiano sucede exactamente lo mismo. El derecho fundamental de protección de datos está consagrado como tal en el artículo 15 de la Constitución y de hecho ha tenido un desarrollo muy importante desde el año 91, año en el que reformamos nuestra Constitución que venía desde 1886 y en 1991 cuando se incorporó el derecho fundamental de protección de datos se empezó a dar un desarrollo muy importante a través de las decisiones de los jueces de tutela, que son cualquier juez de la República a quien le llegaba una acción constitucional preferencial llamada de tutela, le daba trámite a esa acción y podía lograr, por medio de ese mecanismo, una protección efectiva del derecho del ciudadano. No obstante ese hecho y no obstante el hecho de que la protección del derecho particular del ciudadano se lograba de forma muy efectiva con la intervención de un juez de la República, lo cierto es que solamente en el momento en que se dota a una autoridad de protección de datos, y en este caso es la Superintendencia de Industria y Comercio la que ha recibido esa tarea a través de su delegatura de protección de datos personales, solamente en ese momento se logra ese objetivo fundamental de tener en cabeza de una autoridad plenamente especializada en la materia y con los recursos técnicos y los recursos financieros para ejercer una supervisión adecuada. Solamente en ese momento se logra una buena protección y un balance entre la protección al derecho del ciudadano y la vigilancia de los sujetos que intervienen en el tratamiento de la información personal, que se logra a través de la posibilidad que tiene una entidad de estas de imponer, por ejemplo, sanciones, multas, ordenarles cierre de establecimientos cuando se presenten ciertas condiciones particulares, etcétera, etcétera. Nosotros desde la superintendencia ya veníamos ejerciendo una función de protección de datos personales o de autoridad de protección de datos personales, pero y lo mismo, también hago referencia a la conferencia anterior de Ana, la ejercíamos solamente frente a datos de crédito y datos utilizados para hacer reportes de deudores morosos en las centrales de riesgo. Esa función la tenemos desde el 2008 en la Superintendencia de Industria y Comercio, la empezamos a ejercer activamente en virtud de que existía un régimen de transición de 6 meses a mediados del año 2009 y desde el 2009 hemos estado muy activos en la vigilancia de esos sujetos que intervienen en la cadena de procesamiento de crédito. Solamente en lo que va del año 2009 a mediados de 2012, la superintendencia ya había abierto investigaciones con base en esas nuevas funciones y esas investigaciones habían generado sanciones en más o menos 185 casos de esas investigaciones que se abrieron, sanciones concretas en 185 casos que generaron multas a esos agentes vigilados por una suma aproximada total de $2 millones. Entonces, las funciones las ha venido ejerciendo la superintendencia ya de forma muy activa, por esa misma razón que comentaba anteriormente, la necesidad de tener una autoridad que ejerza sus funciones y ejerza una vigilancia efectiva, que no solamente logre la protección del derecho concreto de ese ciudadano que se acerca a pedir la protección de su derecho, sino que adicionalmente logre, por intermedio de la imposición, del adelantamiento de ciertas investigaciones, pues imponer las sanciones correctivas que sean del caso para evitar que se presenten conductas reiterativas por parte de los sujetos de vigilancia. Adicionalmente, nosotros hemos querido ya en el año 2011, en diciembre de 2011, cuando se conocía el texto del proyecto de ley que ya anuncié que se convirtió en ley de la República, en diciembre de 2011 creamos esta delegatura de protección de datos personales y adicionalmente creamos una dirección de investigación de protección de datos personales que nos permite tener dentro de la misma superintendencia, en esa misma autoridad de protección de datos, una primera instancia que es el director de investigaciones de protección de datos personales, que conoce de la investigación en primera instancia, la adelanta y la lleva hasta su fin, si es del caso con la imposición de una sanción o con una orden al sujeto vigilado o con el archivo de la investigación, y en segunda instancia, en una decisión ya que no tiene una apelación posterior, la decisión la revisamos en la delegatura para la protección de datos. Esa decisión es una decisión final dentro de la Superintendencia de Industria y Comercio y solamente se puede revisar ante los jueces de la República, dado el caso de que se presente una acción judicial para cuestionar la validez de esa decisión, pero no tiene más revisión en sede administrativa, entonces estamos logrando una protección efectiva con una garantía para los sujetos procesales de garantía del debido proceso dentro de la actuación administrativa en la Superintendencia de Industria y Comercio. Adicionalmente, hace aproximadamente un mes y medio, creamos en la Dirección de Investigación de Protección de Datos Personales 2 grupos de trabajo especializados, un grupo de trabajo que hemos denominado Grupo de Habeas Data, que es el grupo que se encarga de recibir las quejas individuales de los ciudadanos y darles trámite a esas quejas individuales que buscan la protección del derecho de esa persona en particular, y un grupo de investigaciones administrativas de la superintendencia que le da trámite a las investigaciones, bien sea por acumulación, cuando detectamos que hay varias conductas de un mismo sujeto procesal que creemos deben ser acumuladas en un solo expediente, y de esa forma tener una vigilancia que sea mucho más eficaz, más efectiva y que nos permita mirar las tendencias en las conductas que se pueden estar presentando por parte de los sujetos de vigilancia. Entonces, esta nueva etapa de la superintendencia que vamos a empezar a ejercer ya con la entrada en vigencia de nuestro régimen general a partir de la semana pasada, pues la estamos asumiendo con todos los recursos, con todo el entusiasmo y con las posibilidades efectivas de realizar una buena vigilancia en la materia. Colombia, por supuesto, ha tenido, como lo reconoce la misma Corte Constitucional en la sentencia que revisó el proyecto de ley que ya se convirtió en nuestro régimen general, una influencia decisiva del sistema europeo de protección de datos personales. La directiva europea, con muchos de sus principios, pues se encuentra representada de forma muy notoria. Los principios de la OSD de 1980, que también son reconocidos dentro de la jurisprudencia de la Corte, también se encuentran ahí recogidos. Son sistemas de alguna manera, no sé si la palabra sea homólogos, pero por lo menos sí recogen esos estándares que desde la Unión Europea se han venido modelando a partir de la directiva del año 95. Quiero concluir ahí, yo sé que estamos cortos de tiempo, pero mi mensaje era que viéramos acá cómo estas nuevas iniciativas que están surgiendo en América Latina de implementar normas de protección de datos personales, pues realmente no se han quedado, por lo menos en el caso colombiano, en la mera implementación de una norma general de protección de datos, sino que se han ido tomando los pasos necesarios para que esa protección sea una protección efectiva y se dote de los recursos necesarios para poder hacer una buena vigilancia que asegure el respeto y la protección del derecho del ciudadano. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Jose. It's very encouraging to hear that you're actually, in some ways, putting the enforcement before the norms. It's good. Our next speaker is Francisco Vera from Chile. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Parto por presentarme. Soy Francisco Vera, soy vicepresidente de una ONG chilena que se llama Derechos Digitales. Nosotros trabajamos temas de derechos humanos desde la perspectiva de los entornos digitales, pero hoy en día me referiré a datos personales en términos más generales. Para nosotros la privacidad es principalmente un tema relativo a derechos humanos. La privacidad como un concepto amplio genera un conjunto de garantías de derechos humanos, desde la autodeterminación, los datos personales, que es algo bastante más avanzado, en varios países no se implementa como tal, desde también la vida privada, pasando por el debido proceso. Y creemos que en esa calidad de derechos humanos el deber o el debate que debería conducirse en torno a esto es cómo balanceamos y maximizamos estos derechos. Esto lo digo porque en el caso chileno hay bastantes diferencias de cómo han presentado las discusiones en otros países. Creo que nosotros creemos en la organización que en Chile hay un déficit gigante en torno a la protección de datos personales y particularmente en el tema que respecta a esta mesa, que es la exigibilidad o enforcement de estos derechos de privacidad, en particular de los derechos relativos a la protección de los datos personales. Por lo tanto, voy a hablar principalmente de eso, de datos personales en Chile, desde su exigibilidad. Parto en el contexto global, bueno, y como también todos han dicho, no hay estándares globales, salvo los convenios de la Unión Europea, que generen exigibilidad o mecanismos de vinculación con estos tratados con las legislaciones internas. Son solamente guidelines, recomendaciones, e incluso si exploramos en tratados de libre comercio, Chile ha firmado muchísimos tratados de libre comercio en los últimos años, las referencias a privacidad o datos personales son completamente mínimas. ¿Ya? Por ejemplo, no sé, en el Tratado de Libre Comercio con Estados Unidos hay un capítulo completo de propiedad intelectual y en relación a privacidad, solamente en el capítulo de comercio electrónico, en el número 15.5, se menciona se hace unas alusiones estándar a la protección de la privacidad y datos personales y a mecanismos de cooperación, pero en ningún caso se recomiendan estándares ni se avanza en torno a una mayor protección de estos derechos, ni siquiera en aras del comercio electrónico o de la confianza de los consumidores. Entonces vemos que Chile en el contexto global, aún siendo parte hoy en día de la OCDE o OSD, también de la PEC como foros globales donde existen recomendaciones, sendas recomendaciones en torno a la protección de datos personales, no se ha avanzado en implementar las mismas. Porque en el contexto local, Chile cuenta con una ley de protección de datos personales desde el año 1999. Sin embargo, esta ley, como afirman muchísimos, no solamente activistas o gente de la sociedad civil como nosotros, también lo afirman académicos en las universidades, esta ley nació con terribles y grandes defectos, principalmente porque fue hecha esta ley pensada en, ¿cómo explicarlo?, legalizar el tráfico de datos personales en el país, o mejor dicho, con los intereses de las empresas que procesan datos personales en mente. Entonces, esta ley es defectuosa a muchísimos niveles. Pero desde el punto de vista del enforcement, tomo el esquema que propuso Nigel. Primero, ¿cuál es el mecanismo de reclamo? El mecanismo de reclamo en Chile, como en otros países, es el habeas data, ¿ya? Sin embargo, este habeas data consta de dos etapas, como en otras partes también. Una etapa donde uno se dirige directamente contra el responsable del tratamiento de datos personales, pero en la segunda etapa ya no existe ningún órgano regulador ni de control de datos personales, sino que la opción que queda es acudir a tribunales civiles ordinarios. Para ponerlo un poco en contexto, y no sé cómo será en otros países, pero en Chile tramitar una acción ordinaria toma al menos un año obtener una sentencia, esto en condiciones completamente óptimas. También, aunque la ley no lo requiere, la asesoría de un abogado se hace completamente necesaria. Por lo tanto, cuando hablamos de poderes del regulador, en este mismo esquema de enforcement, vemos que ni siquiera hay un regulador, sino que los mecanismos se entregan completamente a la actividad de los privados. Sanciones. La sanción máxima que se contempla en Chile es de hasta $4.000, y esto es en casos de que no se cumpla la decisión del tribunal o que se condene a la máxima de las multas. También hay un sistema de indemnizaciones que en el sistema continental, o al menos en el caso de Chile, tienden a ser bastante acotadas. No existen instituciones como daños punitivos, ni se premian las costas judiciales de una forma como sería deseado. Por lo tanto, en conjunto, el sistema de enforcement de Chile es una ley que es completamente insuficiente. De hecho, ni siquiera me voy a referir a las disposiciones sustantivas de la Ley de Datos Personales chilena porque no vale la pena en este contexto. En este contexto lo que ha sucedido es que el nivel de control respecto de las garantías, de las pocas garantías que puede contener la ley chilena en protección de datos personales, no se cumplen, ¿ya? No se llevan a la práctica porque el descansar en una acción netamente, judicial, que debería ser una acción, como digo, de protección de derechos fundamentales, descansar en la necesidad de asesoría judicial, claramente ha resultado en que hayan poquísimas sentencias por este ejercicio de esta acción de habeas data en Chile, desde el año 99. Y como les decía, está claro que esta ley nació también con grandes problemas de aplicación, a tal punto que desde el año 99 hasta la fecha, haciendo una revisión somera de proyectos de ley ingresados, contamos 36 proyectos de ley en Chile que dicen relación con la reforma de determinados aspectos de datos personales. Normalmente, y con fines electorales probablemente, lo que más se atiende en Chile, por lo menos, es el aspecto de los datos financieros. Y eso ha generado bastantes proyectos de ley, como les decía, de los cuales solamente 2 han tratado de reformar de forma global el sistema de protección de datos personales chileno. Un proyecto del año 2008, paralelo a la entrada de Chile a la OCDE, que ese proyecto quedó archivado hacia el año 2000 y no siguió ningún avance, o sea, hacia el año 2010, perdón. Y el año 2012 se presentó un nuevo proyecto que está ahora en discusión en Chile y que es básicamente lo que nos va a tomar el debate ahora en nuestro país sobre cómo queremos enfrentar el tema de datos personales. Y ahí resulta particular ver que el proyecto que ingresó al gobierno recientemente en nuestro país tampoco contempla una autoridad de protección de datos personales. Solamente le da a una agencia del consumidor algunas facultades de fiscalización, pero, también de generar modelos de prevención, pero en general el modelo de enforcement chileno va a seguir siendo, si avanza este proyecto de ley tal como se presentó, el sistema de enforcement de la Ley de Datos Personales chilena va a seguir siendo esencialmente defectuoso. Y con esto no me refiero solamente a la presencia o ausencia de una agencia de protección de datos personales. Ya he escuchado muchas personas en el marco de esta discusión en Chile decir que el modelo europeo está vencido, que se tiende en Europa a la sobreregulación de los datos personales, pero acá el problema no es si tener o no una agencia y ni siquiera me atrevo a decir sobre ciertas atribuciones más específicas o menos específicas. Acá el problema es si tenemos un derecho que efectivamente va a resguardar los derechos humanos, perdón la redundancia, de las personas en relación con sus datos personales, con su capacidad de autodeterminarse informativamente y en un contexto mucho más amplio en torno a sus derechos de privacidad. Y eso es principalmente, creo, el Estado en Chile, pero también me gustaría que esto sirva como también tenerlo de modelo, de noción de lo que puede pasar en el resto de la región, en algunos países con las discusiones relativas a datos personales, donde se pueden esgrimir banderas como oh, no queremos sobreregulación del tema, cuando en realidad lo que subyace a estas discusiones es un tema de derechos humanos y de qué derechos van a tener las personas, los ciudadanos de cada país en relación con sus datos personales. ¿Ya? Esto más allá de una moda, más allá de cumplimos o no cumplimos cierto estándar, tiene que ver con cómo en el día a día se respetan estos derechos. Y esto tomando en cuenta también lo que todos han dicho, como concuerdo plenamente con que es también muy necesario tener un tema de conciencia sobre los derechos de privacidad en torno a las personas, o, perdón el anglicismo, pero un poco de awareness sobre derechos también es sumamente útil para que las personas puedan ejercer estos mismos. Pero como les decía, lo importante acá es que la discusión se centre en cuáles son los derechos humanos involucrados y cómo potenciamos y maximizamos estos derechos en armonía con otros, por supuesto, más allá de si adoptamos un modelo A, B o C de regulación. Un poco para no distorsionar los debates y, como digo, de cara a lo que viene en mi país, por lo menos en Chile, es la postura que nosotros queremos adoptar y es lo que quería compartir con ustedes. Cualquier otro tema podemos verlo después en las preguntas. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Francisco. And our final speaker is Renata Avila from Guatemala.
I will speak in Spanish. This is easier. Yo les voy a hablar del enforcement en Guatemala. Es una situación muy distinta a la de los países discutidos acá, porque primero, Guatemala no es miembro de la OSD y eso hace una gran diferencia. Segundo, Guatemala es un estado frágil, casi fallido, donde realmente las autoridades no hay ni siquiera un enforcement efectivo en los asesinatos. Entonces, si nos vamos a este tipo de temas, es mucho más difícil. Para darles una foto general del tema, la impunidad en Guatemala, si somos optimistas, el índice es más o menos de 92%. Si somos pesimistas, es 96% de los casos. Hay una comisión internacional contra la impunidad instalada en Guatemala que busca como ayudar a que este índice se reduzca, pero esta misma comisión de Naciones Unidas contra la impunidad está adoptando medidas totalmente contrarias a la privacidad, promoción de escuchas telefónicas, promoción de espionaje electrónico, no espionaje electrónico pues autorizado por medidas administrativas y ni siquiera por un control judicial. Y es un discurso, el discurso de la seguridad como contraria a la privacidad es el que prevalece en todas las conversaciones, en las conversaciones del sector privado y del sector público. Las fiscalías no están equipadas para enfrentar una investigación en temas de violación a la privacidad y datos personales, no están entrenadas para casos de privacidad y justifican que la ausencia de una fiscalía especializada o de una unidad especializada en la Procuraduría de Derechos Humanos con el discurso de no, tenemos problemas de violencia extrema, tenemos problemas de asesinatos, 6,000 asesinatos al año, entonces todos nuestros esfuerzos deben estar enfocados en eso y no en temas de privacidad, y eso es para otro tipo de países. Pero nos enfrentamos también que en temas como propiedad intelectual hay una fiscalía especializada que tiene un presupuesto inmenso que se dedica al enforcement de estos temas en una forma eficiente, entonces es más bien que intereses se están empujando en la agenda. Hay un problema también para el enforcement de este tipo de temas de cultura. Es una cultura de vigilancia la que se vive en Ciudad de Guatemala y en las áreas rurales. Por ejemplo, hay una fiesta en las aldeas cada vez que se inaugura un sistema de vigilancia por cámaras en las ciudades pequeñitas. O sea, hay pueblos donde no hay electricidad en todo el pueblo, pero sí hay un sistema de control de cámaras, por ejemplo. Entonces, en cualquier edificio ustedes van a tener que presentar cualquier cantidad de datos personales, muchas veces escanean las huellas digitales y todo eso es totalmente normalizado. Hay controles policiales de policía privada donde escanean los documentos de identidad, toman una foto a la persona cada vez que visita el lugar y todos esos datos se guardan. Es totalmente normal. Entonces, que alguien venga en Ciudad de Guatemala o en el área rural de Guatemala a pronunciarse en contra de este tipo de medidas o a pedir regulación o limitaciones, se asocia como un discurso contrario a la prevención de violencia y el crimen. Además, Guatemala es una población que está experimentando masivamente por primera vez su conexión a Internet y a las nuevas tecnologías, y ese es un factor a tomar en cuenta también. Hay actualmente 14 millones de habitantes y 17 millones de teléfonos celulares, muchísimos de ellos conectados a Internet. Entonces, es la primera vez que una gran parte de la población, la mayoría de la población es menor de 25 años, está experimentando conectarse a un medio electrónico y están poniendo muchísimos datos en línea. Por ejemplo, muchas de las compañías ofrecen un paquete barato para redes sociales donde la gente no puede acceder a Internet, pero sí, en general, pero sí puede acceder a Facebook, por ejemplo. Esa es la capa baja y media puede acceder a ese plan fácilmente y ponen mucha información disponible en línea y hay una gran ausencia de educación y de concientización en el tema de privacidad. Les voy a decir rápidamente, porque sé que estoy corta de tiempo, una lista de todo lo que no hay en Guatemala. No hay una legislación específica en temas de protección de privacidad y datos personales. No se incluye el tema de privacidad en el diseño de las políticas públicas, sino como les expliqué, al contrario, en todas las políticas públicas es la propuesta del gobierno es de más datos pueda dar el ciudadano, sin controles, sin medidas de seguridad de cómo se almacenan, nada. No se incluye el tema de la privacidad como un tema de protección al consumidor y usuario. Tenemos una unidad adscrita al Ministerio de Economía de protección de consumidores y usuarios, pero no se ocupa en absoluto al tema de privacidad. Si hay una violación a la privacidad, no es un delito penal de acción pública, es de acción privada. No es un tema que está incluido en la agenda del Congreso. No es un tema que se discute cuando se establecen convenios de cooperación con otros países. No está incluido en la negociación de los tratados internacionales. Por ejemplo, se excluyó del tratado CAFTA con Estados Unidos y se excluyó totalmente del acuerdo de asociación con Unión Europea. No es un tema que pidan las personas, está totalmente fuera del discurso de los ciudadanos y también totalmente fuera de la agenda de las organizaciones de derechos humanos. Y no es tampoco un tema que se apropie la sociedad civil que trabaja en temas de seguridad. Por ejemplo, fue la misma sociedad civil la que en una mesa así exigió al Congreso la aprobación de una ley de registro de teléfonos celulares que era contraria totalmente a la Declaración de Madrid, por ejemplo. Entonces, el mecanismo de reclamo en Guatemala. Si alguien quiere hacer efectivos sus derechos en el tema, necesita una fuerte inversión para pagar los abogados, porque no es un tema que pueden seguir de oficio. No va a existir la conciencia dado este contexto, es decir, va a tener poca cobertura de prensa y sabemos lo importante que es la prensa para un tema de este tipo. Y es una barrera muy alta de entrada. Si tenemos en cuenta que el salario mínimo de Guatemala es como poquito menos de $200 al mes y la hora promedio de un abogado es más o menos $125, entonces es muy reducido el número de personas que pueden hacer posible una acción de este tipo. Pero de existir las condiciones para que se dieran este tipo de procesos, seguramente verían el enforcement de la protección de los datos personales que almacenan las empresas de seguridad privada, que están mezclando sus bases de datos, están compartiendo sus bases de datos de toda la información que recolectan y proveyendo servicios de inteligencia privada totalmente no fiscalizados. Por ejemplo, si secuestran a una persona, ya tienen todo este data mining y pueden saber inmediatamente muchísima más información que la propia inteligencia del Estado y la policía. ¿Y de dónde sacan toda esa información? La están compartiendo, obviamente. No hay ningún mecanismo y habría que ver enforcement en el tema de cómo están usando las agencias internacionales de inteligencia los datos que recolectan de guatemaltecos. Hay contratistas privados emitiendo los documentos personales y no hay ni siquiera una supervisión que diga que los datos biométricos de todos los guatemaltecos están almacenados de forma segura. Y pues bueno, ese es el panorama es bastante sombrío porque, como les digo, ¿no? Ni es prioridad, ni le interesa a sociedad civil y mientras tanto todos los ciudadanos están acumulando expedientes digitales de todos sus datos sin ninguna protección. Y creo que dos ideas nada más que podrían coadyuvar un poco a que la situación no sea tan mala es que los actores grandes privados, como las grandes empresas de tecnología, las grandes compañías europeas, americanas y demás que están sujetas a estándares de privacidad en sus países, apliquen los mismos estándares de privacidad que tienen afuera dentro de países como Guatemala. Creo que esa es una idea que es parte de la responsabilidad social empresarial hasta cierta medida, el respeto de las compañías a los derechos humanos, que podría utilizarse como un paliativo. Y el otro también es los grandes actores públicos, la cooperación internacional. Es decir, si Guatemala está recibiendo ayuda de Unión Europea, si Guatemala está recibiendo ayuda de Australia, de Estados Unidos, de Canadá y demás, que se apliquen para esos convenios y para esos proyectos y para el diseño de esas políticas públicas financiadas con dinero público de otros estados que sí respetan o que sí tienen un marco de protección de la privacidad, que se apliquen los mismos estándares y el mismo diseño que lo que se aplica en casa. Creo que esas son dos ideas con las que cierro.
Thank you very much, Renata. I think that's a very useful reality check for those of us from countries which don't face the same sort of challenges that Renata and compatriots do in Guatemala. But we've heard from a wide range of situations, from the very mature data protection regime in Hong Kong through the emerging regimes in Colombia and Chile to the very fragile state of privacy in Guatemala. We have a few minutes left for questions, so could I invite members of the audience to indicate if they would like to ask a question to any of the panelists? No takers. Laura will always ask a question. Laura, would you like to? Yeah. Can we have the microphone up front, please? Oh, while the microphone is coming up, Renata has a question from Twitter, so she will give us that.
Katitza Rodríguez de IFF está preguntando al expositor de Chile qué acciones están tomando para adaptar su ley a las guías de privacidad de la OSD.
Ahí sí, ya. Bueno, a ver, Los dos proyectos que yo mencioné que intentaban reformar o estaban buscando reformar la ley de datos personales chilena han sido respuestas principalmente a la incorporación de Chile a la OECD. Sin embargo, el primer proyecto del 2008 contemplaba darle atribuciones de Agencia de Protección de Datos Personales al Consejo para la Transparencia en Chile, que es el órgano que ve las solicitudes de acceso a la información pública. Sin embargo, en el proyecto del año 2012 ya no existe esa alusión y lo que se hace es que se reparten competencias con la Agencia de Consumidores para fines, como decía, preventivos y fiscalización. Y hay otro proyecto, además de datos financieros, que le entrega ciertas atribuciones a la Superintendencia de Bancos, al regulador del sistema bancario, para efectos de controlar los datos financieros. Entonces, en ese sentido, por lo menos en términos de tener una agencia de protección que, si bien no es un estándar explícito, OCDE va de la mano un poco con los principios que establecen esos estándares o con esas guidelines, sí podemos ver que el proyecto del 2012 es un poco de retroceso frente al 2008, aun cuando el 2008 también tenía ese proyecto muchísimas falencias. Entonces, en resumen, los intentos de reforma de ley de datos personales en Chile responden a la incorporación de Chile a la OCDE, pero a nuestro juicio, bueno, la primera iniciativa no tuvo mucho futuro y la actual necesita serias reformas y mejoras para poder efectivamente cumplir con un estándar de protección de datos personales en los términos que se establecen tanto en OCDE como en otros foros internacionales.
Thank you, Francisco. Laura Ballard.
Thank you. My name is Laura Ballard. I'm with the U.S. Department of State, and since no one else was asking questions, I thought I might continue the discussion that Nigel and I were having a little bit at the beginning about independent data protection authorities and sort of exporting European models. It occurs to me in listening to the Guatemalan presentation, this is exactly the problem that I'm alluding to, that because I think if we were to tell the Guatemalan government, well, why don't you pass a law and appoint an independent data protection commissioner, I'm still quite dubious that this would bring about the result of enhanced privacy protections. I think we would see something potentially quite different happening than we might see in you know, a European country or a country with more of a responsiveness to its citizens, one might say. I'm also wondering whether the APEC cross-border privacy rules system is somewhat useful in this situation. I know Chile participates in that system, and one of its advantages is that it relies on either public or private, what they call accountability agents, which might be a Better Business Bureau or the Japanese J-Mark or trustee. It could be a private entity that serves as one sort of interface between the data subject and the data controller and provides some means of dispute resolution. To participate in the APEC system, a member economy of APEC also has to put forward a privacy enforcement authority, so there must be a public regulator there. But it's possible that in many instances, a consumer's complaint could be adequately resolved by this accountability agent without having to spend money on legal fees or to avail oneself of the court system. So it's just a question for the panel at large. You know, does the APEC system actually hold some benefits in situations in countries where the rule of law isn't quite where it is for, say, OECD member countries? Thank you.
Yes, I just wanted to say that in Colombia we're actively looking to join APEC as observers. We're not of course an APEC economy, but we're seeking through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to join APEC as observers. We included in the law binding corporate rules article. It's not exactly European, or it's not only European oriented binding corporate rules. We're looking to establish and include in the forthcoming secondary regulations that are going to come somewhere after the enactment of the law, a system whereby we have some sort. We have not decided what or which type of agents we're going to implement, but we're certainly looking at the possibility of having certain, it's not exactly accountability agents, but certifying parties that would be credited through a national authority, and then given the responsibility of giving individual accreditations to individual companies, and in APEC related model. So we're looking into that. It's something that's going to happen, and we're looking forward to joining as observers for that.
Not sure, Francisco, do you have any knowledge of the APEC system, or not? No. Okay.
Regarding the APEX system, we are not in Derechos Digitales aware of what measures are taking our government regarding that. As I told before, though, we are not fans of any particular recipe on how to take privacy rights, but we do think that privacy rights should have international standards which are enforceable in each country, but not from a particular from point of view like having or not a regulatory agency, but also taking into account what rights are at stake and taking those rights seriously. That's
I think we might hear more about the APEC initiative during the main conference over the next 2 days. We have time for one final question. A gentleman in the back of the room.
Sí, la pregunta es para el señor Bermúdez. Quisiera saber si el gobierno colombiano está tratando de conseguir la protección adecuada como la obtuvo Uruguay y cómo piensa obtenerla. Gracias.
Colombia ha manifestado que está buscando una declaración de adecuación, y de hecho en un primer momento cuando se expidió la ley de habeas data financiero, que era una ley que originalmente se había pensado como una ley de carácter general, pero que dada la interpretación que le dio la Corte Constitucional en la sentencia de exequibilidad, porque era una ley estatutaria que protegía derechos fundamentales, y la Corte Constitucional le dio una interpretación limitada que hizo cuando fuimos en una comisión de gobierno en ese momento a dar esos primeros pasos de cara a la búsqueda de la adecuación. Entendimos que había todavía un camino para recorrer en la medida en que teníamos que tener un régimen que pensábamos que habíamos logrado, pero que dada la interpretación que en ese momento le dio la Corte, fue una interpretación que restringió el ámbito de aplicación de la ley, y en esa medida el gobierno buscó en su momento la adopción de un régimen general que fue el que finalmente vio la luz la semana pasada. Pero en definitiva el gobierno sí lo ha anunciado así, el Ministerio de Comercio lo tiene como una prioridad y sí está buscando adelantar ese proceso.
Thank you, Jose. We are out of time, so I'd like to ask you to thank our panelists. Thank you.
Excellent job. Thank you so much. We have a break scheduled for this time. We have coffee available in the restaurant in the hotel. You can bring the coffee back down. We're going to get started at 11:25. As you see, our title is Privacy Rights Are a Global Challenge, and that's exactly what you're hearing. The next panel will start at 11:25. It'll be talking about emerging trends in the Internet Global Village, cross-cultural views of privacy, freedom of expression, and human rights on data collection, retention, and use. That'll start at 11:25. Thank you.
There we go. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this next session. We have the advantage of you having had a coffee break, so I hope you enter it refreshed. But we have the disadvantage of standing between you and your lunch as this panel progresses. So we will try and be crisp and interesting and brief in our comments, and I want to allow as well time for discussion after we have the interventions from the speakers who are here. I want to just introduce them briefly. Most of them are very well known to those of you in the audience. Our speakers, and we'll be following the order in the program, are Peter Hustings, who is a European Data Protection Supervisor, Gus Hussein, Executive Director of Privacy International, Alison Tilley, Executive Director of Open Democracy Advice Center in South Africa, Malavika Jarayam, a partner at Jarayam and Jarayam. And we also have, unfortunately, we do not have Mr. Chakchuk, but we have a fantastic substitute for him, which is Miriam Marzuki, who is at the end of the row here, who was our moderator of the first session, so is known to all of you. What are we here to discuss this morning? And we're here to talk about privacy, obviously, but what is privacy? Actually, it goes centrally to the notion of autonomy and self-determination, right? If we kick it up a level, that's really what we're talking about. And so it's the protection of individual human beings, each human being, and their autonomy and ability to determine their lives for themselves. So it's excellent to be following the first two panels, which gave us the current state of play, and it was quite obvious that there is a great deal of activity going on, a lot of foment, or even turbulence, one might say, in the field. I want to thank the Data Protection Commission Authority of Uruguay for allowing us to hold this event here and their assistance in organizing it. I also want to thank the Public Voice for their efforts, and as someone did earlier, and very importantly, to single out Lily Coney for the huge amount of work she did in bringing us all here together. When we talk about privacy and data protection and human rights, we're talking about two of the most successful legal regimes in the history of humanity. So it's important not to forget that. Many times in the privacy field, people feel rather beleaguered and that things are not going so well. But if you look at the adoption of these laws and their spread, both the human rights laws and institutions and the data protection laws and institutions, they are extremely successful and well-founded. I like to think not about the internet or the World Wide Web or social media. I like to think instead about what I call the ubiquitous information environment. And it has 5 characteristics that present themselves to us each day. Those characteristics of the ubiquitous information environment are embeddedness, ubiquity, obviously, unboundedness, decentralization, and complexity. So sometimes there's a lot of discussion now about social media, but really we need to think and should have been thinking about all media, because computing activity and communication activity will be occurring in all media, solids, liquids, gases, including the air that we breathe in and out. So what's old here and what's new? What is old and exists quite well, actually, are the human rights laws and the data protection laws and principles. What's new, what are the trends here, are some of the technological developments, some of the individuals or the growth in the number of individual human beings who are affected by these developments and activities, and the amount of information that is available, including information about individual human beings. But at the same time, none of this is much of a surprise. It was entirely foreseeable. It is foreseeable. And the trends that are coming are foreseeable. And I say this importantly to reject the notion that you hear commonly, that this is all so new, we have no way to think about this. And we have no way to protect people in regard to this. Because I reject that entirely. It's completely false. We do know how to think about this, and we do know how to protect people. It's a failure to protect them that is in operation. I've asked each of the speakers to talk about what they think are some of the particular opportunities and challenges in this area, and I'm now going to turn it over to them. We're going to begin, please, with Peter Hustings.
Thank you, Deborah. I want to first welcome this particular meeting. The Public Voice meeting is a place where many voices are being heard. We've heard quite a few already this morning, and we'll have more. But also clear this morning that over the last decade and more recently a number of years, much is happening in Latin America, and I hope that this entire week, in fact, will push this development forward, and also globally, of course. Now, I want to use my time to address 3 points. That's our basic approach, already touched on in previous panels, some of the basic elements and some of the challenges, the need for innovation to face those challenges. In terms of the basic approach, the way we've been taking this in Europe was the human rights approach, the fundamental rights approach. This means it was not articulated as consumer protection. It was not articulated as a condition for economic development, for e-commerce or what have you. It was seen as something profoundly fundamental for a balanced society. And that applies when the internet did not exist, when it was emerging, and when it is developing at fast speed. Now, part of that approach was that we have distinguished privacy from data protection. That is, data protection to allow a more proactive, a more systematic approach to face the challenges. This morning, it was already referred to, at the time when this was formulated in the context of the Council of Europe in Convention 108, it was clear that this would create also conditions for exercise of free speech, free association. There was a link with non-discrimination. So it was by far not a very focused view on privacy and data protection only. This was seen as part of a very wide agenda. This was then followed and specified in the Directive 95 referred to, but also I want to mention to you that in the realm of, say, constitutional approaches, the Charter, which is now a binding part of the European Union set of treaties, the acquis was written down of the distinction between privacy and data protection, and you see the key elements of data protection in Article 8 of the Charter. That brings me to the basic elements, and it's a very simple story. It's some principles on which we now have an increasing consensus around the world, which is translated into rights of data subjects, obligations for those commitments, accountability for those who are processing data, and various kinds of enforcement mechanisms, among them institutional oversight. I'm not going to repeat those rights, you know them. I'm not going to repeat the obligations of controllers, and nor am I going to repeat the principles. But I want to speak particularly on one element, and then flag to you that Charles Raab and Colin Bennett were among the very first to phrase this in their narrative of governance of privacy, and they were describing the role of self-regulation, they were describing the role of privacy advocates, they were describing the role of civil society, in fact. So what we are actually discussing is much more than just some legalism and some lawyers' small talk. But among those key elements is the principle of independent supervision. And Lara referred to this morning. I'm going to be very specific. It does not mean living in isolation, not being accountable. Jacob already said this. The Court of Justice in a recent case phrased it thus and has repeated this. It is to be free from any external influence, so to be free to set your own priorities, to set your own agenda, to be able to strike a fair balance, and be accountable to Parliament, to the public, and to courts. Now, this means that independence is there to empower regulators to be strategic, to be effective, and to be selective, to be more effective. And the issue of resources, which was addressed this morning briefly, and Jacob said, my boat is never long enough, my resources are never going to be sufficient, but it means under all scenarios, the emphasis is what are the priorities of a regulator? If the priority is to just take cases in the sequence as they come, there's going to be an ineffective regulator. If you know what you want to do, 2, 3, 4, 5 points, then you will be increasingly effective. So independence is an empowering element for effectiveness, to free from external influence. And that is phrases which could very well land in the OECD guidelines as well. Now, this brings me to my last point. That is, that's all fine and well, but we have a huge need for innovation because we've not been effective enough. And we need to have much more of effectiveness to face the challenges which are around. Facebook, among them, but there is, of course, many more phenomena. We are trying to regulate this in a new legal framework. It was mentioned this morning, and it will lead to some of those innovative approaches to make rights more effective in practice, to redefine the breadth of rights on the internet, to redefine what responsibility and accountability means, that is an action to do something from the very first moment to build privacy in, and to demonstrate that this has been done and be accountable on the results. And we're building this also, and then I come back to something I mentioned in the beginning, on a growing global convergence. Not in detail, but a growing consensus on what is the essence for an effective regime for data protection. My vision would not be that we would all sign up to one single convention, although Convention 108 has a pretty good chance of formulating this for many, many member states and non-member states of the Council of Europe, but that we agree on 80% plus of what it takes to have an effective regime, so that where we have a regional differences, we can be effective in what is now referred to as an interoperable system, which reduces the complexity of diversity and helps us to go forward in a global world. I'm happy to answer to any questions on this, but my bottom line is it's really quite basic. It's quite basic and so important for our societies. This is why it's a human right to have an effective system. And I wish that we can develop the innovation in a new framework very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, very much. Thanks, Peter. I'm going to ask all the speakers to speak, and then we'll open it for discussion. So our next speaker is Gus Hussein.
Thanks, Deborah. I want to pick up where Peter left off, and I want to address one of the topics for the panel, which was this issue of culture. This amorphous, elusive issue of culture and diversity and all what Peter was talking about, regional diversity and all of that. I want to try to just focus on that. I'm going to use our Privacy International's work over the past few years in developing countries in Asia to tease out some of the frustrations around discussion around culture. Because when we started our work in Asia back in 2008, our friends in industry, our friends in the US, and even our friends in Asia were saying, oh, you know, privacy is not that important to people in developing countries. Privacy is not important to poor people who don't have basic access to basic goods. And privacy is an alien concept to these cultures. This was a resounding statement from everyone we spoke to. And it's one of the most frequent comments was, look, there's even a word for privacy in many of the languages in these countries. And so we embarked on our work in 2008 with, well, we were trepidatious, we were scared, worried that everybody would be proven right and that we were wrong, that privacy was not a global value. And what we found is confounding. It isn't clear, but it certainly isn't clear that privacy is a cultural issue as well. So what we found, we did find that in some countries, there indeed was a very long history of surveillance. There are stories that the Siamese kingdom in Thailand used to etch ID numbers on people. Sadly, that's not just unique to that part of the world, as we all know. So I could hardly say it is a cultural issue in Thailand. The Chinese had a population register as early as 400 years before Christ. So arguably, the Chinese don't care about the collection of personal information by the state. But wasn't that true that the Swedes have also had a long history of collecting national census data. I don't think that's conclusive evidence that the Chinese people don't care about privacy. It just is that historically information has been collected. And if you recall the story of William the Conqueror, one of the first things he did when he took over Great Britain was that he created a census. It's not unique. It's not just down to somebody's culture that we would collect this kind of information. The second aspect of culture is often the issue of religion. And some would argue that some religions are more individualistic and some religions are less individualistic, and privacy is accorded differently in each. Jeffrey Rosen did a great book on, say, the Judeo-Christian foundations of privacy. But what we found from our colleagues in Muslim countries in Asia was very different data. We found that Islamic scripture is actually quite detailed about the protection of privacy. There's stories within the history of Islam about even issues relating to the fruits of the poison tree and how you cannot use evidence of a crime if it was gathered through illegal surveillance. So, if I was to take a simplistic cultural approach, I would say, okay, well, that shows that Muslim people care about privacy. And if you look at the evidence in say, Pakistan and Bangladesh, there are emergent individualistic notions of privacy, which is very interesting. Yet, if you look at the world's largest Muslim democracy, Indonesia, often the articulation is that it's a very collectivist society. So religion doesn't help explain culture in that sense either. It's actually quite erratic data that comes out of it. So then there's the third aspect, that is well, to put it simply, poor people don't care about privacy. We're seeking basic goods. We're not seeking protections, such individualistic protections as privacy. And actually, some of the data did support that. There was a survey in Thailand in 1996 that found that poorer people really weren't concerned. But when you dug deeper into the data, you saw that poorer people weren't aware about their privacy rights. And actually what we're finding across the developing world is quite frightening, is that this argument that where there's poverty, there shouldn't be individual rights, we're seeing the expansion of some of the largest surveillance systems on Earth. And Malavika will discuss what's going on in India, but on my presentation on Wednesday, I'll discuss some of the developments around biometrics in Africa. I would say the largest databases of biometrics are now in the developing world. Culture, these things are changing, though. I referred to the Thai study from 1996. In 2001, another Thai study was done where 70% of Thai internet users were very concerned about privacy. What was interesting is that they had no idea what to do about it. And survey after survey across the region found the exact same thing, mounting concerns about privacy. Peter's point is right, there is a global convergence. But what's worrying is that people don't know what to do about it. In China in 2008, there was a study that said 95% of Chinese citizens wanted better practices when it came to the protection of personal information by the government. And 43% of those who had been polled had experienced abuses. But only 4% had sought redress. Again, it's probably down to an awareness issue, but also the lack of legal safeguards and the ability to seek redress. And another interesting study from China in 2007 hinted at the cultural issue. Again, where it's saying, okay, maybe the Chinese people have a different expectation of what is public, what is private. And often the explanation is given in highly populous countries is that you don't have an expectation of privacy because you're surrounded by so many people. But this 2007 study found that in 1978, the average living space per Chinese citizen was 3.6 square meters. But by 2003, that had risen to 11.4. And so there was this emerging concept of space, personal space, and this enlarging concept of personal space. And what we also found across the region was, although people would speak of the lack of culture, the lack of awareness, there were constitutional safeguards. So our work was spanned across Bangladesh, Hong Kong, China, Nepal, Malaysia, Thailand, the Philippines, Pakistan. And the majority of these countries had constitutional statements about privacy. So it wasn't this alien concept. Even if there wasn't a word for it, there were still constitutional provisions. What was always lacking, or often lacking, were laws to give life to these constitutional statements. But that hasn't stopped the Supreme Courts and the High Courts from across the region from ruling on privacy issues. The Indonesian court last year ruled on communication surveillance. The Indian Supreme Court has countless cases dealing with surveillance issues, including the High Court in Mumbai 2 years ago ruling on sodomy, where the government argued that the culture of India, of Indian people, is that sodomy is a foreign concept. And the court said that's not true at all, and based their ruling on privacy, borrowed from European Court of Human Rights jurisprudence and borrowed from the US court cases as well. But what we did find is that these countries need support when it comes to privacy. They need help to understand, how do you create a legal regime? How do you create safeguards? And unfortunately, the West is doing a very bad job of this. Just today, Pakistan said they're going to update their 1885 Telegraph Act that enables communication surveillance, basically copying British law from that era. They're going to update it and use provisions from the USA Patriot Act and British communication surveillance law from 2000. These are the examples we're setting for the rest of the world. India, when it embarked on its ID program, looked to the United Kingdom's ID program as an example of what to do. We're setting a very bad example, even as we dismiss these countries' need for privacy and their emerging culture of privacy. Let me just close with one last point, though. The discussion of culture, we found, is one where culture is spoken for, and often by the powerful. People speak on behalf of the people of India. People speak on behalf of the people of China and say, oh, their culture is so-and-so. But we don't actually properly seek out independent data on what is a culture, what is a cultural view. And often our statements about culture come very, very close to stereotype. And that actually is very worrying. But regardless, there is something called culture, and it is an incredibly powerful force, often a conservative force. And we need to find a way to use that force for the protection of privacy, as opposed to how it's being used within the political discourse as a reason to do away with privacy. Thank you very much.
Gus, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Alison Tilley.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank the conference organizers for the invitation to speak to you today. I come from South Africa. We have just passed a new data protection law, and when I say just, I do mean just a few weeks ago. It's been a very long process passing that legislation, initiated in 2000, and then going through the South African Law Reform Commission, and then coming into Parliament for, I think, close on 4 years. I've been working closely on that legislation, and I have to say that I can't say that I'm any closer to really being able to describe the culture of privacy in South Africa. I can make some observations, and perhaps you can draw some conclusions for me. Consider the South African context. We're famously two nations, it's what a former president said of ours. Two very different contexts. In the first context, it's first world, it's wealthy. The issues are those of any developed information society. Our main problem is really expensive bandwidth. In the second society, in the second country, if you like, life is brutal and short. The average age of mortality for women is 48. 60% of the child population of South Africa lives on less than 575 Rand a month, which is about $70. There are huge racial discrepancies in relation to this. 70% of black children are poor, less than 2% of white children are poor. With a population of around 48 million, only 10% of those have access to a telephone, a landline. Internet subscriptions estimated around 5 million, only 300,000 of those have broadband. So how does this divided nation feel about privacy and data protection? Let me give you two examples. The first one was an explosion around the issue of privacy, around a picture, a painting, which was called The Spear of the Nation. I don't know how many of you followed the story. It's a painting of President Zuma. It depicts him in the style of Lenin striding forward with his fist raised. The spear of the nation is not, in fact, President Zuma, but it's the depiction of his penis in this painting. The painting is one of a number of paintings by an artist called Brett Murray, which are of that style. They take a familiar liberation history icon image and they reimagine it in the context of corruption and dissipation. And that's the artist's comment on the ANC or our majority party. Now this picture, this painting was reproduced in a local newspaper and all hell broke loose. The gallery was told by the majority party to take the painting down. A protest march was organized on the gallery. The president sued the gallery and the artist for violating his right to dignity. Two separate individuals took it on themselves to save us from the image by defacing the painting at more or less the same time, at which point the painting had to be taken down and the individuals were arrested. I personally received copies of pictures of the painting several times because people wanted to make the point that you could not control the image or that information in a digital society. Our Film and Publications Board then tried to rate the picture. They rated it as 16. So only people of 16 years and older were entitled to look at the image. That was subsequently overruled. But what was most immediate and impressive about this was that there was a huge public outcry. People said that in Zulu culture or in African culture, it is very disrespectful to portray adults, and particularly adult males, as naked. Many people said that the privacy and the dignity of the presidency had been violated, and the president. And it was also suggested that it was part of a broader racist agenda to portray the president negatively. Now, of course, there was the other side, and people saying it was fair comment in the Constitution, there is a right to freedom of expression. Our president has many wives and many children. There are issues around, he was previously charged with rape, although he was found not guilty. So there was an enormous debate about these issues. Eventually, the editor of the paper concerned pulled the picture from their website, largely in response to the extreme distress that people were showing at this violation of what they saw as the violation of the president's right to privacy and dignity. Clearly, what was apparent was there was an utter lack of agreement as to what privacy means for a public figure in the political space, in the context of the right to freedom of expression and the right to privacy and dignity. We have a number of court decisions dealing with the right to privacy. And you know, I don't think they seem to help us one way or the other. In the context of data protection, let me give you a different example. We, I think, in South Africa do not really trust our police services. If I was giving this talk in South Africa, I would probably at this point greet facetiously the members of the National Intelligence Agency who would probably be in the audience. We find that our police and our intelligence services are busy spying on South Africans, but they're also very busy spying on each other as part of the ongoing faction fights within the majority party. In fact, one of the stated objections in the secrecy bill, which has been introduced, or the Protection of State Information Bill, one of the specific objectives is to stop the spies from spying on each other, or the purchasing of intelligence from so-called information peddlers. And this had a direct knock-on effect in our data protection law, which specifically does not exempt state security services from the provisions of the data protection law. So while the Act does not apply to the processing of personal information, and it appears to give an exemption to those dealing with national security, what it actually says, if you read it carefully, is that they are only exempt to the extent that adequate safeguards have been established in legislation for the protection of such personal information. So at the point at which the police, the army, and the intelligence services introduce their own data protection legislation, which will protect the processing of personal data, until that time they are governed by our data protection law. Now, what conclusions can you draw from this? I think that what we certainly can say is that people do make it clear what they think are private matters and where they believe privacy should have a role to play. And this is even in the context of poverty, which is deep and endemic. Our legislation certainly reflects the scars of our history in terms of not just current issues around surveillance by the state and by state security instruments, but a history of that going back into our apartheid past. How do I conclude this debate and say where I stand on these issues? I suppose you can draw a conclusion of sorts from the fact that I decided it was not appropriate to show you a picture of the painting. So if you want to have a look at it, go online. You can Google it. It's called Spear of the Nation. But I decided that I thought in this context that I felt that it was not appropriate to show you that picture. So I attempt in this way to outline some of the cultural and historical issues that we are grappling with around privacy and data protection.
Very good. Thank you very much, Alison. All right, our next speaker is Malavika Jayaram. Malavika, please.
Hi. I used to work as a lawyer in London, and on one of my trips back home to India, I'm going through passport control, trying to fly back to England, and the woman looks at my passport and is looking for a visa stamp for the UK. And you know, I used to travel on an Indian passport, so I needed a visa for every single country. So, you know, my passport was full of stamps, and she's looking through it. So, you know, I was in a hurry, and I said, look, it's on page 26 or whatever. And I said, you're looking for a residence stamp, not a tourist visa. So she said, oh, you live in England? And I said, yes. And she goes, oh, your husband works there. And of course, you know, with my EU data protection hat on, I'm going, no. And, you know, I can stonewall anyone till the cows come home, so I'm going, no. And she says, your husband lives here and you live in England? And I say, no. And she goes, you're studying in England? And I said, no. And you can see the cogs and wheels whirring in her brain as she's, you know, going number crunching through every permutation and combination she can think of, and judging me in the meanwhile. And then she goes, I think after about 7 attempts, she gave up, and she looked at me with desperation and said, Madam, where is your husband? By which time, you know, I really wanted to catch my flight, and I said, I don't have one. And she turns to the first page of my passport to look at my date of birth, looks at this, looks at me, looks at it again, and goes, and, you know, I'm getting really irate saying, look, this is none of your business. Can I just get on my plane? You know, and then she looks at this, And she probably decided I had such a hard life without a husband anyway, she might as well stamp my passport and let me get on with it. So she stamps it and is about to hand it over, and just as I'm grabbing it from her, she suddenly has this big smile on her face and says, "Madam, next time you come back, please bring some sweets and good news." You know, and so my data protection privacy side is going, how dare you, you know, this is none of your business. And the tiny little Indian left in me is going, oh, that's really sweet that she cares. So I go back to England and I tell friends this, so now this has become code. Every time I go back to India, people say, don't forget sweets and good news. And in fact, one of my friends even suggested that, you know, whenever I fly back to India, I should just grab whoever happens to be sitting next to me on the plane and say, see, husband, here, found one. Found him on the flight, but, you know, here you go. You know, now you can tick your box and say, all is well with this woman. So this is sort of, I mean, this is just a little anecdote to tell you how weird it is sort of straddling these boundaries and living now in a country where I come from, you know, a place where I want my privacy respected, I want space. And we were discussing this last night, that you would think in a country with so many people, with such a huge population, you'd have very finely grained rules of fighting for your personal space, very nuanced ways of dealing with people around you to have some zone of autonomy and anonymity in everything that you do. But I think people just feel it's actually futile, and, you know, it's a very collectivist society, and they just think you can't actually achieve any space, so why bother? And when I moved back to India, this was the sense that I had, that, you know, there's this sort of self-perpetuating myth that Indians don't care about privacy. But the more people keep saying Indians don't care about privacy, the less they care about privacy. So I actually started researching this and looking into it. And when you had the ID scheme being rolled out, that was sort of my epiphany when I said, you know, this scheme was being touted as the answer to absolutely everything. You know, it was one, like, it always reminds me of one of those Monty Python, you know, apart from the road, sanitation, healthcare, education, what have the Romans done for us? You know, so I always think of the ID scheme as, you know, well, apart from, you know, national security, immigration, border control, terrorism, what is this scheme supposed to do for us? So for me, it's interesting that whatever egregious changes some of our e-governance projects have, I think it's really important that they've at least raised awareness of privacy as an issue, and they've actually got the government to legislate and look at having a new privacy law for India. So I think the silver lining to having, you know, a DNA profiling bill being rolled out and, you know, biometrics being collected at every stage is that you actually have a very robust debate going on, and you have very interesting case law coming out of it now. So just to briefly tell you some of the things that I think are interesting in India is that there hasn't been much raw data in terms of comparing Indian attitudes to privacy, but there are a couple of researchers from Carnegie Mellon who are trying to do this now. They've compared the US and India when it comes to privacy, and they're now launching a second phase of that study. So that's an interesting space to look at. And one thing that's quite peculiar in India is that we have a huge tension between transparency on one hand and privacy on the other, because we've had so much endemic corruption in the system that it's taken years for us to have a Right to Information Act and for that to become something with teeth as opposed to something meaningless. And I think given the larger picture concerns and the public interest in transparency and exposing the government, privacy is always seen to be, you know, the thing that gets sacrificed, because exposing government, exposing corruption is always seen as much more important. So we've had a very weird situation where transparency and privacy seem to be fighting in this seemingly not, you know, zero-sum game, but now we're having a more nuanced approach to it. And in fact, recently, we've had a parliamentary subcommittee look into the need for a privacy law in India, and they've just, you know, I was hoping I could come here and say this report is going to come out in the next, you know, few weeks. Unfortunately, they published it 2 days ago, and it's 92 pages long, so I've had to sort of sit up all night reading it in case anyone asked. But one of the interesting things that's come out through the report is they specifically talk about this tension between transparency on one hand and privacy on the other, and talk about how to balance those two. And we've even had our Prime Minister come out a couple of days ago when the report was published, saying that you can't have the right to information constantly give way to privacy, and that privacy has to be sensitively handled. And in fact, there are instances where individual privacy is far more important, and you can't allow collective transparency to trump that. So that's one of the interesting tensions we have. The other tension we have is that because India makes so much foreign exchange revenue out of the IT industry in general and outsourcing in particular, there is a huge resistance in industry to having any kind of data protection or privacy laws, because they see it as something that's actually going to make it difficult to do business in India. So when we actually amended our Information Technology Act to have certain rules and regulations to expand on our data protection principles, there was such an outcry from foreign companies doing business in India that our government had to hastily issue a press note saying, okay, we'll exempt the whole IT sector from this. That there are some doubts about the legal validity of a press note and what the status of that would be, but it's something that the government is mindful of. We also have a lot of new case law coming out of India, and there is a growing trend towards looking at what the rest of the world is doing. Previously, we've had case law that have specifically said things like the concept of privacy is a cultural notion related to social norms, and different societies would look at these differently. Therefore, referring to the Data Protection Act of the UK or the laws of other countries to define privacy cannot be considered a valid exercise to constrain the citizens' fundamental right to information in India. Parliament has not codified the right to privacy so far. Hence, in balancing the right to information of citizens and the individual's right to privacy, the citizen's right to information would be given greater weightage. So this is what we started off with a few years ago. But in recent case law, they've actually relied very heavily on American jurisprudence to link privacy with the notion of autonomy. And we've actually had them quote legislation and cases saying, where the concept of privacy embodies the moral fact that a person belongs to himself and not to others, not to society as a whole. This, I think, is pretty significant in a country where you are considered to belong to the rest of the world and not to yourself. So I think it's a really interesting space to watch, and I'd be happy to answer questions later, and thank you.
Malavika, thank you so much. Miriam,
yeah,
please.
Thank you. Sorry, it's me again. I've been asked this morning to participate to this panel and I have to apologize on his behalf. Moez Shakshuk, the COE of the Tunisian Internet Agency, was supposed to be present here. He couldn't come, and he offered to do this via video conference, but it was too difficult to arrange. So here I am. I think in this room we would all agree that fundamental rights, including the right to privacy, are universal. But cultural differences, or I would say some cultural relativism, is often taken as a pretext to downgrade some rights in some countries. For instance, speaking about freedom of expression, many countries, and especially many people in Tunisia, are arguing in favor of having blasphemy laws in reference to cultural and religious specificity. But there is no cultural specificity, as Gus shown through the work of Privacy International. There is no cultural specificity in data retention, for instance, or in government surveillance in general. On consumer rights issue, the globalization of services and application especially in the communication field, is now such that here again, which cultural specificities could apply when all people are using market leaders' tools such as Google, Facebook, etc. In Tunisia, there is a data protection law. It exists since 2004, adopted in July 2004, and it is an organic law, actually. The law is almost a copy-paste of the European Union Data Protection Directive and also the French Data Protection Law. So it's a good law by many aspects, but there are 4 articles out of the whole law provisions, 4 articles which are could and actually are undermining the whole benefit of the law, since they provide that all data protection measures become invalid when data processing is conducted by a public legal person. This public legal person could be the public authority, a local government, or a public agency. This restriction apply when the data processing is made in the framework of public security, national defense, criminal investigation, as well as, and I quote here, the data processing, as well as when the data processing appears necessary for the execution by the public legal person of its missions according to applicable law. So you can understand how wide this provision or this restriction is. Actually, I said that this law was adopted in 2004, and as you can imagine, it was adopted under the former dictatorship of President Ben Ali. But the problem is that now there is no real sign from the new government of a willing to change such provisions or to give some priorities to this process. The only good sign, actually, is the nomination of, or was the nomination of a new president of the Tunisian Data Protection Authority, Mr. Mokhtar Yahyaoui, and I'm very happy to announce that he's with us in this room and will attend the whole conference. And so the new president of the Data Protection Authority is very famous for his resignation letter as a judge during Ben Ali era in protest of the dictatorship. So we have some hope here. Actually, the data protection law and the whole data protection and privacy issue itself are not really raised in the public debate. In Tunisia, people are very much sensitive to freedom of expression issues, which is natural and quite important due to the huge censorship they have experienced under dictatorship, but they are not as much sensitive to data protection issues, as for now at least, except when it's related to obvious surveillance by the government, since still under the dictatorship, many people, and not only the renowned opponents, many people had their profiles and their mail accounts hacked, and a severe deep packet inspection and online surveillance was exercised. So people are very sensitive to this as for now, but not to the general issue of privacy and data protection. As a matter of fact, last year when we had the first democratic elections in Tunisia, the problem of the transparency of this election was raised during the preparation time, and some people suggested to use biometric identification for the election process, but this was not the choice of the institution that organized the election, and other means were used to guarantee the transparency of this election, so that you vote only once, etc., etc. Very basic. Very basic guarantees, and as a matter of fact, after the results were announced, everybody recognized that they were actually transparent elections. So it shows that we don't necessarily need very invasive method to guarantee transparency of elections, but still there were these proposals from some people. I will conclude by saying that there is a real need now to address the issue of privacy and data protection in the public debate, especially since the respect for privacy is, as we all know, a necessary condition to fully enjoy associated freedoms and ultimately a real democracy. And I would finish with a very personal note. Especially now under an Islamist government, there are many human rights issues at stake, including privacy issue and freedom of expression. So there is a real need that people be conscious of these problems and the kind of guarantee that are needed to achieve this. Thank you.
Miriam, thank you very much. So this was quite a tour d'horizon at this point, quite a tour of the current horizon and what is going on around the world. I'd like to open it for questions, please, now, or comments. There is a microphone here. You'll see him roaming around. Are there any comments or questions?
At the back left.
Please. There's a microphone.
Thank you. My name is Tim Sparapani. I'm representing the World Privacy Forum. Thank you to the Public Voice for holding this important conversation. I'm wondering if the panelists could comment on the well-known and well-established tendency for companies to go to the less developed regimes where there's less clear privacy standards around the world and perfect certain systems, and then re-import them back to other nations where there's more developed systems, saying, aha, we've perfected it in the following countries. And I point in particular to the work that's being done in India, this mass collection system. The World Privacy Forum has written forcefully about the implications of the system. And so I'm wondering if you all could comment about the boomerang effect of taking to, in the older parlance, the third or fourth or fifth world systems for collection and surveillance, perfecting them and saying, aha, they worked really quite well, let's bring them back to the rest of the world. Thank you very much.
Good. Peter, please.
I don't have a clear example at hand referring to this kind of exchange at the national level or EU with particular third countries. But with a little sidestep, I want to mention that my office is organizing a regular exchange with international organizations. We will have our 4th workshop very soon, which in many ways are interacting in multiple jurisdictions. For instance, the example of the UNHCR and how to deal with refugees in camps in Africa and in Asia, and issues on identification and, in fact, refugee management, or Red Cross International Rescue Services, or from another angle, Interpol. So there we are in this workshop sharing best practices, and I hope that is a useful contribution. The next workshop in November will have 31 international organizations from all over the world, and this is a typical area where national law does not apply, and they are active on the ground, and they are dealing with real people, so to speak. So it's a way to contribute to this international progress. But I give way to other examples.
Comment on policy laundering?
Well, what we're finding actually is exactly what Tim's talking about when it comes to the development of surveillance technology. 2 years ago, we restarted our Big Brother Incorporated project, which is infiltrating surveillance industry trade shows and finding out what kind of surveillance kit they're building. And we were shocked by the type of surveillance technology that was actually being deployed. But we were even more shocked by the types of countries that were coming to these trade shows and trying to purchase this technology. And we were even more shocked that the companies building these technologies are actually German and British predominantly. So German and British firms building surveillance kit that would be illegal in a democratic country, selling it to the developing world. At one of the trade shows, the government of South Sudan was in attendance. They'd only been a country for 6 months, but they're already attending surveillance trade shows. This technology then makes a massive profit for these companies, and one of these companies is now advising the UK government on how to modernize surveillance law. So it is that form of policy laundering that's going on, and some people are making a heck of a load of money in the process.
All right, now I see Lily creeping toward the front here, so she's going to cut us off shortly for lunch. So I'm going to take the chairman's prerogative to ask each of the panelists one last question, and they each get a minute or less to answer. Then we're going to break for lunch, and I'll turn it over to Lily, and she'll tell you what's happening next. So my question for each of you is the following, and we'll just take it in the order of the speakers. What is the one thing, in your view, that could be done, that can be done, not idealistically or whatever, but that actually is capable to be done, that would most improve the situation of privacy today? You're first, Peter.
Well, this is an easy question for me, but it's a big answer. That is, I see the step forward making the legal framework in Europe much more effective in practice. Jacob Koonstam spoke about where we are. I think it is feasible. If we are successful in doing this, we'll have a huge impact in Europe and obviously also in interacting with other parts of the world. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Gus?
It's a little self-serving, but I would say build the capacity of civil society. What the NGOs have done from nothing in the countries that we've been working on is remarkable. Again, when we started in India, we were told, Indians don't care about privacy. And now the discourse is so rich with such amazing NGOs in the field, taking cases, raising awareness. I think the role of NGOs is always understated.
Thank you, Gus. Allison?
I think it's probably part of the work to be done by NGOs, but government as well. I think there needs to be an ongoing and much deeper conversation about what these rights really mean. I think the right to privacy, the right to dignity, the right to freedom of expression, and where the boundaries of these rights are, is something that, unless there's a really thoughtful conversation about, it's very difficult to find each other. And I would think that that's where we would need to go.
Wonderful. Thank you.
My take would take the debate to the people, because I think that when you have it at a very intellectual level, you talk about privacy and security and cost benefit, you lose audiences, no one understands it. But when I talk about privacy in India, eyes glaze over until I show them the ACLU pizza advert, and then everyone goes, oh my God, is that what they're going to do with my data? So I think making the debate more accessible and speaking to normal people in normal English and not through lawyers is the biggest thing you can do in developing countries.
Thank you. Miriam.
Yeah, thank you. With my Tunisian hat, I would say one thing, one word, education. Education to privacy, to what it means, and its importance. With my European hat of this morning, I would like to see more drastic measures, maybe including reciprocity measures in the field of transborder data flows.
Thank you very much, all of you. So now you have your work program, all of you, for the next year until we reassemble a year from now. Please join me in heartily thanking this exciting panel today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A wonderful discussion, very rich in the tradition of the public voice, thought-provoking, and also educational for all of us. I wanted to point out, we're going to break for lunch. Lunch is on your own. You grab whatever panelists that's spoken this morning and you really want to get in depth into the topic that they discussed. This is the opportunity to have a discussion with them one-on-one. We will reconvene, and there's some little changes on the agenda. The 1:30, we will be back. We should give you some more time, so let's make it about 1:40. We'll be back in the room to begin the panel. The first panel discussion at 1:40 will be what are the next challenges for digital privacy protection? That will be followed at 14:30. Thereabouts, about 14:40, discussion on civil society's challenge to preserving civic participation. And believe me, this is developing democracies as well as established democracies. We're going to be talking about some of the challenges that are ongoing. And then at 15:45, we'll have the discussion about adoption and implementation of Latin American consumer and privacy protection laws. We're doing this because of the parallel discussion that's going on. It'll give opportunity for people from that discussion to join us for the last two panels. Please enjoy your lunch. We'll start back again promptly at 1:40 or 13:40. So enjoy lunch. See you then. If you haven't picked up your badges, please do so either on your way out or on the way back in. That's how we're keeping count. We'd like to tell people how many people participated in today's meeting. It's a lot of you out there, so by all means, let us know you're here if you hadn't pre-registered. Thank you.